That actually worked. I hit it harder and it recorded. So stupid. We are back with the final episode. We have finished Oblivion by David Foster Wallace, and I couldn't be happier to be done with something. Today's story is really poopy. It's very shitty in the most literal sense.
That's the shittiest thing I've ever read.
If you get any takeaway from this as a review or anything, it's this story was shitty.
Absolutely.
We are covering the Suffering Channel, which you mentioned off air might as well been a novella because it is novella length. It's hundreds. It felt like 1,000 pages. I don't know why.
Yeah, I felt like Old Man in the Sea was like a lot shorter than this.
Old man talking about fish for 15,000 years of just fish talking. Somehow that was more entertaining than what I read here. And I don't know why, because this had bits where I was like, okay, I like this. And then it just, something happened that I didn't. Because I'm sure the audience is in great suspense right now. This story is about poop. More specifically, this story is about the artist, not a artist, the artist, as he's referred to by Wallace, who makes perfectly sculpted dumps. Yeah. I think one of them was the Marilyn Monroe holding the skirt up over the sewer grate. I think that was one of his poops.
I don't even remember all of them.
I could just be making that up. I don't know, but that's the idea. He doesn't sculpt them afterward. They come out of his rectal area perfectly. See, with 2022, with modern 2022 vision, I feel like I'm reading this different than what it was when it was written, because now I'm thinking of it as not his butt muscle, like his sphincter muscle, like contracting and contorting to make this sculpture. I'm thinking of like a 3D printed, his whole rectal tube just forms into the shape of the object, and then he poops it out that way.
Maybe this was a prophecy. Maybe he's like, yeah, there's just going to be these gigantic machines that just shit out art.
I didn't get that takeaway, but that's pretty much where we're headed, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to give the most briefest synopsis of this story because it's really not worth talking about that much, in my opinion. I just want to be done with the Oblivion stuff. So, Skip Atwater is a salary man who works for Style Magazine. It's located in World Trade Center Building 1, and he gets tasked, or he comes, I couldn't fucking decipher whether this was his stupid idea or what, but he finds this guy who poops these amazing statues or something in Indiana. So he wants to cover this for a human peace story, something along the lines of like, I forget what they had some acronym for it, but, World's Incredible.
There's always acronyms.
Yeah, some kind of World Incredible bullshit, Wondrous World, something like that. So it was like a thing for the magazine, and he's trying to pitch it to the editors and stuff. And this magazine, what I understood, was just made up of interns. Like, this guy was the only paid person who even worked here, it seemed like. Everyone else was a fucking intern other than maybe like one of the editors. So
yeah, I didn't get that. I was like, is everyone here not paid, or does intern mean something different?
There were so many interns, and there was a stark contrast between, which I did like this, where he's in Indiana, which is his home state, and he's meeting this weird guy, this weird artist, and his morbidly obese wife. We'll get into that. I like the contrast between that and then like the American Psycho style, I got a feeling of like 80s and 90s New York consumerism, like almost like the stock exchange, like this hubbub never ending. Everybody's a fashionista, oh, what's your business card made of? Oh my God, is that white? No, it's bone. Like, American Psycho bullshit. Like, that's what like a lot of this story was. But there was an interesting contrast, and that was with these weird interns. And there was a scene where I actually did like, where the interns are all discussing poop, because he really does break down the poop and people's ways of growing up that makes them poop a certain way, like childhood traumas, how they were trained to poop, and then like these stupid interns, like they just discuss all these things about pooping and different people's pooping habits. And there's one scene or one there's one story with a guy or girl or somebody tells about a guy's going down on his woman and she farts, and it's very robust, and like it's so that's the kind of humor we're dealing with here. But it was very interesting how he told these stories and broke down the psyche of how people go to the bathroom and how it's intimate, and some people think of it as gross. And like he had, because there was another part later on too about that.
There's that one girl who was like, did you ever think of it as like a baby? And like you're holding on,
and you have to say bye-bye as you flush it. And you want to put it in a stroller and walk around with it. Everybody just looked at her.
What are you doing? Stop doing cocaine.
Yeah. So that was wild. And then later on, there's a part where they break down like the habits of pooping in a different way, where poop's only gross after it comes out of you, but in you, it's just like an organ. You don't think about it. And then they're like, oh, he gives them multiple examples. Like, oh, do you think skin's gross? Well, no. I mean, you see it every day. But what if you looked at the table and there's just a slab of skin? You're like, oh, yeah, fucking gross. It's disgusting. So he broke down like the different way. Like it was a good psyche breakdown of just how people think. Where, yeah, poop's not actually gross until it comes out of you, because that's when you see it and you think of it. And then another example was, well, why isn't saliva gross when it's in your mouth and you swallow it? But if you filled a glass with it and then swallowed it, it's fucking revolting. Yeah, exactly. So if you want a good like breakdown of just the inner workings of people's minds that you've never thought about, this is a good story for that. But going back to the main narrative, if you could call it that.
Wow.
There's also something, the name of the story, the Suffering Channel. It's like a TV channel and some cable thing, and it works in conjunction with the Style magazine, like it's a parent, like it's a part of the same company or the owner or something. At some point I was flipping through and I was just like speed reading, so I didn't really pay attention to some of that. But the Suffering Channel basically is this TV channel that's just like awful news. It's just like, oh, you know, a mother with terminal cancer raising her kids is dying in the hospital ward. The parents find the remains of their 13-year-old daughter who was raped and murdered, like things like that. He actually lists it in like a list form at some point. I'm like, what the fuck does this have to do with anything? It's very jarring. I don't remember if I mentioned this because this is very pertinent to the story. Because I said they're in the World Trade Center where the Style magazine is located. The issue with the poop artist is supposed to be released on September 10th, 2001. So obviously the next day, all those people were dead in the World Trade Center. I don't know if the issue would actually be released. There's no resolution, of course. I don't know if the issue would actually be released or if it's just, you know, the whole company's done because they got blown up. So I would imagine it's just not going to happen. Or if it did get released, like nobody's going to care because obviously 9/11 was a much bigger deal than this guy pooping masterpieces. And we'll infer what that means, what Wallace meant by that in a little bit. But I just found like that was going to be a thing where it's going to be this crazy ending and oh my God. And you don't get to that point.
No.
Of course not. Why would we have the one thing that's most interesting about the story take place? Fuck that. Let's barely mention
this
it.
This is
actually.
Wallace we're talking about.
Yeah, he knows how to rivet up the tension.
Have you ever read an auto manual? Still more exciting.
I found the perfect example of why I don't like Wallace's writing style right here. There's a scene later we'll discuss where this Skip Atwater guy, the salary man who's covering the story, he's with the morbidly obese woman in the car, right? We'll bring her up in a minute, but there's just a part.
Maybe we should say, rather than morbidly obese, BBW. Just so that we can be inclusive and positive about it.
In the story, she's super hot somehow. We'll get to that. But here's the perfect epitome of why Wallace's writing style is just not for me. There's a scene where she just gets, like, she's just taking her seatbelt off, getting out of the car. This is how he wrote this sentence. He watched her begin trying to disengage her seat's restraint system. Why? Why would you say it that way? She tried to take off her seatbelt. That's it. Why does it have to be disengage her seat's restraint system? Like the way he says it's so clinical. I don't understand.
The way he's doing that, if you were to just read it in this story, you would think, okay, well, maybe this character has just got a very analytical and removed way of thinking. But it's literally the voice of all the characters throughout all of his stuff is exactly the same, unless he's trying to be like sarcastic and snarky, like with the girls and all the interns. Then it's like, but then I'm like, oh man, I totally reside with that. That makes more sense. I like that style of talking and description because it makes sense. I don't need, and he reached for the doorknob and twisted it, engaging the unlocking mechanisms to step forward through the port. I'm like, dude, just get to the point.
Just open the fucking door. All she had to do is take the seatbelt off. She didn't need to disengage the restraint. Like, stop. And like you said,
it's I feel like that could be a sci-fi thing. It's like the captain's like, disengage the restraint system.
It's just everything's written like that, and it comes off so clinical and automated and artificial that I just can't help but think that Wallace might have been an android. I mean, is there any other way to decipher that? I just don't know. But going back to this story, so here's the quick synopsis besides what I already said. This Atwater guy goes to Indiana, meets this weird guy who reminds me of Sling Blade. What was his name in that? He had to have a name, right?
I think it was Brent.
No, the guy's name in the story is Brent, the artist, but in Sling Blade, Billy Bob Thornton's character, his name wasn't Sling Blade. What the fuck was his name in that?
I don't know.
French
It was Billy Bob Thornton, right? Everyone's Billy Bob Thornton. He's always Billy Bob.
I'd rather discuss Sling Blade than this story, but you know what? We can't. We have to do the fan service here, so he goes to Indiana.
To service the fans.
And Wallace proceeds to spend the rest of the story discussing how morbidly obese this woman is, but also very sexually enticing somehow. Like her elbow is the size of a man's kneecap. Her face is the size of like a skillet or a frying pan or something. She's all encompassing, and at some point she molesters our editor guy here in a car when the car literally just starts falling apart because she's so big in it and just
it's like leaning to one side, isn't it? It's like
the axle bends and I assume that was a sex scene that happened, but I don't know how it would have happened if this woman was so big because they were in like a small car too.
It just felt like a freaking cartoon. I'm like, there's no way you're being so analytical about everything and precise. And then you're going to say her eye was the size of a coffee cup. I'm like, no, it's not.
It didn't make sense. Like her finger was so fat, she put it over his lips and it was like the size of his whole nose. Like it just covered his mouth. And I'm like, how are you going to make sweet sexual love to this big, beautiful, bodacious woman? But she was very predatory, it came across to me, because she was a lot more intelligent than anyone gave her credit for at the beginning. And then she clearly just wanted to be famous. And how was she going to be famous? By fucking making lots of money off her husband's poop art. And he was
exploiting her husband.
And the reason why he was so weird is because he was very abused as a child. And I'm not going to go into that because it gets very gross. But he gets abused as a child and ends up very shy about his bathroom habits, which makes it like, how are you going to record this guy dumping when he can't poop when anybody's even in the house? It didn't make sense, like how they would go about this. And Wallace, I found something online that pretty much sums up my opinion of the meaning of this story, I guess, if you can really get one.
Is it pornography? Is that what you found?
I wish it was. So the central thrust of this story, in the end, everything is ultimately for nothing, and that the majority of our work, and that the majority of our work will not have any long-lasting appeal in the face of greater, more powerful events in human history. That's where the 9/11 aspect comes in, because they do all this work, this whole fucking novella-sized story, to get this guy's stupid poop art and make it should this be like a human interest story, or should this be like about how sad this guy is? Like, they go through all these angles and all this stuff and do all this ridiculous work for such a stupid topic. And then it's going to mean absolutely nothing because 9/11 happens, and that obviously just fucking destroys this dumb story. So you get that aspect, and then there's another side aspect. I don't know if this was something Wallace was trying to deliberately like the way he did it was so cartoonish. I don't know if it was like an actual point he was trying to make, but he discussed like the reality television and stuff. And one of the guys, maybe the guy who ran the Suffering Channel, I don't even know at this point, but he thought about starting his own show or something, Celebrity Shitting. And Wallace proceeds to just list like a whole page worth of celebrities, from Oprah to Marilyn Monroe or Marilyn Manson. I don't know.
He like takes a break halfway through and then continues it. I'm like, what?
Tom Cruise. He brings up Martha Stewart in her Connecticut mansion, and like he gets real descriptive with some of them, and it's just all about like this guy wanting to. He has this big grand idea that eventually we'll have a TV show about celebrity shitting. And here's the thing. When I read that, I was like, 100% if that was a show, people would watch the fuck out of that. Yeah, and
totally.
That's where I thought maybe that was another thing he was trying to point out, is how ridiculous celebrity worship culture is. And because he did mention like all this celebrity boxing and all that stuff. And as Americans, we just worship celebrities. So something as gross and mundane as shitting would be something I would imagine a lot of the lower hominids on this planet would be involved in watching. They would want to watch that. I personally wouldn't want to watch that, but I would have some kind of curious. I don't know. I don't want to say I'd be curious. I would watch it. Fuck it. I would. I would want to see like what's this about? Celebrity shitting. And then
don't tape over the DVR. Don't.
He talked about the noise and everything would be involved, like all kinds of camera angles. And but you know what? Who am I, the kid? I would at least turn it on once to see what it was about. Like, I don't.
It's freaking ridiculous.
It would get so gross. And how much would you have to pay celebrities for that? I don't know. It would
Probably
start
too
off.
much.
It would start off with the lower celebrities, like the D-list, the YouTubers. They're below D-list, so YouTubers and TikToks, and then eventually one of the higher Logan Paul types will break in, and then they're like, oh shit, maybe real celebrities will actually do this, and then you'll get like, I don't know, Carrot Top or something. Who's the female Carrot Top?
Pusha T.
What's I forget her name, the redheaded goon. She looks worse than Carrot Top actually. Kathy Griffin. Griffith? Whatever. Yeah. You get those types. We went on a bad I don't know.
No,
that was a wrong path to go down. But the point is, let's bring it back to the book here. What was your takeaway from this book? Or the story, rather, not the book. We'll cover the book at the very end since we are finished.
The story, it was more readable and more easily readable than a lot of them. As stupid as the story was and as cartoonish as some of the stuff was, it was at least a little more enjoyable than, reading the philosophy of nature and all that stuff, where it's just one block of text and it's just hyper analytical. And I thought what he did with the scene breaks, using the arrows to kind of say like, hey, we're going to continue down this trail, we're going to go back on this one, hey, we're moving the story forward.
Yeah, that was unique.
I thought that was pretty cool. And then I kind of forgot, so the initial reading, I kind of forgot that it takes place the day before 9/11, and so I didn't even have the everything is pointless and there is no point to anything and woe is me and all art is shit sort of thing. I took it, my initial read through was that it's pretty much anything can be created into some grand piece of art. It just takes people time to get used to the idea, and they have to validate that it does have worth. And then eventually over time, more and more people will kind of validate that, and more people will agree and pile on, and it'll become, a more acceptable thing, until it's like, of course, why wouldn't anyone think this? Like, oh my gosh, yeah, Pokemon cards are totally worth millions of dollars. Why wouldn't, anyone think that cartoons and electric mice wouldn't be worth this much money? So it's like, it's, you can look around and see all these things that we take for granted, and it's like, oh yeah, that's actually really stupid. But we've all agreed that it has worth in our society and culture for some reason.
Well, Wallace did an excellent job, in my opinion, of showing at the beginning how ridiculous this excremental art it really is. Like, everyone's just like, one, they didn't even want to be involved in it. The editors or whoever was in this magazine didn't even want to read it, didn't want to look at the pictures, didn't want anything to do with it. They just turned it down immediately. And he ends up having to, like, sneak the pictures in somehow so the lady looks at it without realizing that was the poop art. But finally, when they got to it, that's when he goes from, look how ridiculous this stupid idea is. This is the most dumb, idiotic thing ever. Could that be art, though? And then actually makes you think through the story progressively, could that be art? And then at some point, it becomes reasonable. We're like, that is art, yes. Even though it's gross and we don't know how this guy is doing it, just the, how how he breaks down, like through the interns mainly, the humanity, lack of humanity, all these different elements he talks about, and it makes you look at the art almost how, like, I imagine people try to pass off modern art, and I always think it's just hoo-ha bullshit. Like, oh, the color red, and you just look at it, and it's supposed to make you feel certain things. Like, it's just a red square. Why is this $30 million? But if you fucking break it down enough, you can make that art by just, actually, the red is supposed to make you feel this certain kind of way, and then it amplifies the attitudes of the like, it just goes on and on. So he actually does that with this story and breaks down the poop to the point where you're like, oh yeah, I can see how that would definitely be art. I don't know.
I'd totally pay millions of dollars for that.
Yeah, I don't know who would want to buy that, but I can see how it goes. I can see who'd want that. So my overall takeaway of this story was it was more entertaining than a lot of the other ones in here. He did a good job of like ratcheting up the tension, like he did in the "Soul Is Not a Smithy" story. This one was with the sexual nature in the car with this big woman. Like that whole scene where he's in the car with that lady just plays out. Where I'm just like, are they gonna have sex? Is she gonna rape him? How is this gonna play out? And
that's what it came across as.
And it's basically they're trapped out like in this car because there's like a tornado almost coming outside. Like it's this horrible storm. And I'm just like, what is going to happen here? Like I was actually very curious how that was going to play out. And then I was actually kind of disappointed how it played out, but I was very curious how it was going to play out. And then he did get
wanted blood.
For anybody interested, he did get a knee injury. The big woman leaning on him. But like the way that plays out, you're really interested to see how that goes. And he keeps breaking it up by going back to the interns and going back to the Suffering Channel and just different things. So you just like, what? No, I don't care about this. I want to go back and see how that part unravels. So he did a good job of that. Still not my favorite story in the collection. And I did find I was skipping paragraphs near the end because I just didn't care anymore. And it affected the story none. Like the story outcome was no different in my mind because I skipped paragraphs because it was just like I would look like there's a scene where they're in a gym. That's when I started skipping because it just went into the fitness equipment and them running and exercising. I was like,
oh yeah.
All I did was just skip to each line of dialogue and just skipped all the descriptors and nothing changed. It was fucking just fluffy nonsense that he adds to these stories, and where it was purposeful in some of the beginning stories, like the Mr. Squishy. This one, I don't see a purpose either, like we discussed in a couple of the other ones. What was the purpose of adding all this extra information? There's none.
Yeah.
It didn't add to the story. It didn't change the story, and it wasn't a central point to the story. So why have it at all? Just tell the fucking story without the, disengaging restraint systems. Like you don't have to do all that. All right.
So if you were to, like, look at the book as a whole, what's your rating? And then if you were to pick, like, 2 stories out of the entire book, what would you say?
I rated this story a 3 because I like 3 stories out of the whole collection. to be honest, a couple of the stories I barely read through. Mr. Squishy, the very first one, I got so bored with that I just skimmed most of it and did not care about what happened. The Soul Is Not a Smithy was probably my favorite. Incarnations of Burned Children, which was the next story, second favorite. And then this one was the third one, the Suffering Channel. I thought Another Pioneer was interesting, though I kind of faded out a little bit here and there when it started getting into, like, I don't know, just too much like caveman era stuff, and it just got really fucking weird and like the philosophy of it just didn't like make sense to me at some time. I just wasn't interested, basically.
Heathen.
Yeah. Good old Neon. I don't even remember what that one was.
That was a suicidal dude with like he was always felt like he was an imposter and manipulating people.
That doesn't really break it down to me. That's like stories kind of.
It's like, why are you talking about David Foster Wallace? Tell us a story.
That one obviously
he visited the therapist and everything, and was like the therapist.
Oh yeah, he was Mr. Super Phony. Yeah, I thought that one was actually pretty interesting. I didn't hate it. I was indifferent on it mostly, but I thought it was an interesting character study. Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature, I did not like. That was the one with the spiders. Yeah. It was short, and it was just weird.
Didn't really have a point. So I was like, I'm not getting anything out of this. Like,
it would have been good.
I'm interested in spiders.
That would have been interesting if that was the first chapter of an actual story.
Yeah.
The next one, Oblivion, I hated. I absolutely that was other than Mr. Squishy. I probably hated that more than Mr. Squishy because I just disliked everything about that story. And then
especially the ending.
Yeah, the fucking it's just a dream. I read today somebody was saying that David Foster Wallace really loved cliches. So like these were all done like, it was just all a dream. Like that was very purposeful. It wasn't him just being lazy or him just like, I'm gonna do what they don't expect by doing what they should expect and making the dumbest ending. No, he just like really liked cliches, I guess. I have to research that more because that was just one source I read that from. But there's people that are almost cult-like with their love for David Foster Wallace. So I'm not in that camp.
Of Wallace.
Yeah, I'm not in that camp. And you know what? It's just a bunch of lit bros. That are
lit bros.
I don't know if I can handle it, but what was your overall rating of this book and your favorite stories?
I'd give it a 3 just because like I don't rate it on, I try not to rate books on like an emotional reaction unless they're absolutely awful, like that Eric LaRocca novel. I can't say that I completely enjoyed it or that I necessarily even liked all the stories or liked it overall, but I thought it was interesting. So, and I kind of learned some things about pacing and tension, and as much fun as we made about the length of certain sentences and paragraphs. Like, I'm never going to take it to that extreme, I don't think, but just being confident enough to be like, yeah, okay, I'm going to have a 2-page paragraph. Just like if this is necessary for the story with the pacing and everything, hell, what's the harm in doing a 2-page paragraph? It's not like Thomas Wolfe over here doing 47 pages. So it's like, so I think I'll give it a 3 because I think it's got some cool lessons, and it wasn't absolutely awful. And then my top two or three would be definitely The Soul's Not a Smithy is 1. I think actually Another Pioneer would be my 2nd, and then Good Old Neon would be my 3rd, because the Burn Children thing was kind of like, I have kids, so it was a little traumatic for me. And
yeah,
I'm like,
too emotional.
I can't enjoy this.
That's what I thought when I read that. I was like, I think Ashley is going to have a vastly different opinion of this story than I will. I think he's going to have a much more visceral reaction than I will. I just thought,
like, it was good.
It was good, but yeah, it was disturbing.
Yeah.
I do want to piggyback on the one thing you were saying. I, from a writer's perspective, did think this was a very interesting and helpful collection, because it showed me, I will 100% say, ways of writing that I'd never even thought of. Like his uses of a window pane to tell a different story inside of a story, I thought was really unique. Like you were saying about the long paragraphs, there are instances in this book collection where he did use it, where how I would think you should use it if you're having really long. Like, this part of the story is supposed to feel bogged down, so this is one way I'm going to do it, is through the writing. And I'm going to have the paragraph seem very long in one big block, and it's going to seem like you're bogged down along with the characters in the story. Mm-hmm. And while he used that was in, like, the Mr. Squishy story, the whole story is bogged down. It's supposed to be bogged down. It's supposed to be information overload, and you're supposed to feel, I don't know, confined in the same room these people are in, and you're just like, oh my God, is this going to end? This is so boring. And that's what I got from reading the story and the way he wrote it. If he wrote that as a regular, short, punchy sentences, fast-paced story, you wouldn't feel like those characters felt. You wouldn't be like, oh my God, who gives a fuck, like you're supposed to feel. Like, you might actually be like, oh, this seems interesting. And from an emotional level, the fast-paced story would probably appeal to you more, and you'd be like, this is a lot more interesting. But from the story he was actually trying to tell, it had to be written the way I would say all the stories had to be written the way they were written, other than, like we discussed with the seatbelt thing. Those stories I felt did not necessarily need that level of analytical writing, that clinical feel to it. I think that's how Foster Wallace thought, which is fine. Like, that was his voice. Okay. That's how he liked to write and stuff. But I didn't think that was necessary in that kind of story. But the writing overall of the story still flowed a lot better. It was for a reason how he wrote this, like with the poop. And he was actually funny, believe it or not. There's a lot of funny parts in these stories. So he wasn't a humorless robot like it might appear just by, skimming through some of these.
Yeah. And like, kind of going off your use of creating effect through the long paragraphs, as much as I hate to do it, I'm going to draw back to House of Leaves and how he how he structured and formatted certain pages to create an effect and give a very visceral effect was effective. So I'll give credit where credit's due, but I need to go wash my mouth out. I need Listerine or gasoline.
Well, like I said off air, so far out of every IRC we've done, I liked House of Leaves the most. So, if that's saying something. But I decided to let you go ahead and pick the next very awful book that hopefully isn't awful. I wanted a good book. I want something experimental, but also a good book. Not that this was
50 Shades of Grey.
Yay. Not that this was a bad book by any means, and there's a lot of people who love Wallace's work. A lot of people like Catcher the Rye, which we both thought was just kind of mid. We were just like, meh. But we're also in our 30s, and that book was not made for us. Fuck, what else did we cover? We tried Jerusalem. That was a big old fail-a-roni. I did the most stupidest thing. I forgot if I told you this. The other day, I was reading the Silmarillion, and I'm listening to a podcast chapter by chapter while I read it. So, I don't want to get too far ahead of the podcast, and I was getting pretty far ahead. So I was like, I need something else to read until I catch up with the podcast. These episodes like fucking 2 hours long. So I was like, hey, Jeez. I'll go back into Jerusalem. I'll read Jerusalem while reading the Silmarillion. That can't be too hard. I started reading the first page of I don't even know what I'm on, 200 or something. And my head just melted. I was like, those are two worlds that should not ever coexist. You should not have the Silmarillion and Jerusalem's writing melding into your brain at the same time. That is just bad. That is Coke and Mentos. That is that's baking soda and vinegar. You're just asking for trouble. So anyone who wants to have a very negative reaction to reading, try that, because that's maybe also throw Thomas Wolfe in there too. Fuck it. Why not? While you're going down that wormhole of just hard to read things. Like,
no joke.
Oh, you know what?
I found the easiest way to read Thomas Wolfe is if you narrate it in your head with a Southern accent, and then you're like, "Oh, it totally makes sense." Oh,
way better. Maybe that's why I don't like James Joyce, is because I don't have the Irish accent in my head. Maybe that'll make it better.
Did he have an Irish accent?
He was Irish.
I mean, it doesn't mean he had an Irish accent.
That'd be kind of weird if he didn't. Now I'm gonna have to look up videos of James Joyce.
Maybe he had a voice like, "Hey, everybody!
How you doing, fellers?
I was walking down the street."
All his characters have Irish accents, though, and he writes in Irish. But other than that, he's definitely not Irish.
No, totally.
He had an eye patch. He was fucking cool. He's one of those guys that's way more interesting outside of writing for me. Like, I read his work and I'm just like, he's a good writer. I just can't get into this. Mainly because I don't understand most of what he's talking about. But that's also because I didn't live in Dublin in fucking 1902 or anything like that.
Dublin.
We will end because you got to leave here soon. David Foster Wallace was an interesting writer. He was an intellectual, a mathematician type, and I don't think I'm going to read any more of his work anytime soon. I am taking Infinite Jest off my list of to read books because I think that'll be like Jerusalem 2.0, where I not only struggle to get through it, but get so bored that I end up just tossing it aside and waste my money. So that is my opinion. Do you have a closing summation here?
No, I mean, he was a troubled dude. You can kind of see flecks of darkness, and I think this is one of the last things that he wrote, except for like he had an unfinished novel, The Pale King or The White King or something.
I actually might read The Pale King. I was thinking about reading that, but I don't want to get really depressed, so that'll be if we get into World War III, I'll start that, because fuck it, what else I gotta do then?
You'll need something uplifting.
Yeah, I want to, maybe Blood Meridian, I'll read that again too. Well, yeah, he was very troubled. We were thinking about doing an episode on Wallace, but I don't think that's necessary, because the more I read about him, the more negative things I see, and I don't want to spread more negativity than we already have. I feel like Daniel Lusky already wants to punch us in the mouth, and probably Chuck Palahniuk too, honestly. I don't think I've ever had a kind word for him on this podcast. And I like the movie Fight Club. I never read the book, but all I read from him was Haunted, and it was such dog shit. And you read a couple of things. I think you said you read Fight Club. You didn't? Did you care for that, or was that? Right. I thought you said he was very sophomoric in his writing. I don't remember. You said something along those lines.
Yeah, that was something mean.
Yeah, that's it. We didn't have. Same with Cormac McCarthy. Good thing he's not on the internet, because he would want to kick our ass. And I actually liked more books of his than I disliked. So, but that's just me. Anyway, folks, we thank you for listening. This has been the Inebriated Reading Challenge, and I am drinking a golden monkey here, so I guess I am not really inebriated. I feel like I was inebriated just reading Oblivion. We have a bunch of excellent book reviews, the Drunken book reviews, actually, on the site if you want to check those out. Most of those are books actually enjoyed for the most part. I think you only have one or two negative ones. So,
a few.
Yeah, you can go to drunkenpenwriting.com to check those out. And fucking Spencer, man, I got on him last episode we recorded, because, well, it was probably fucking months ago now by the time this episode releases, but he hasn't had, his last article was published in October, maybe, and his last actual story was May of last year. And I was like, dude, what are you doing here? What are you doing, man?
We're voting.
To be fair, he actually did write stuff for the short story collection I got to work on here soon. But other than that, go to Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, all the stuff that we're on. You can go to that Drunken Pen Writing Guy .org// Oblivion fuck monster poop shit. Sorry, my mind melted there.
Yeah,
Anyway,
couldn't tell.
yeah. Thank you for listening. And if you have any book suggestions that you think we should cover for the IRC, we try to do more experimental, weirder, but still entertaining books. So you can let us know. We have a comment thing on every social media. Believe it or not, you can DM us, or you can go to, again, drunkenpenwriting.com, where we have a contact page and our email and all that stuff. So thank you for listening, and we'll check you later.